Okay there, welcome. And today we are here with Hugh. Welcome, Hugh. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Who are you?
I am a person with a phone whose notifications are on, apparently. I am a Latin teacher and currently sort of in between formal teaching jobs, but I've been teaching and tutoring online. I also am a musician, audio engineer type person, and vegetable gardener, but most of my time is spent up working on Latin texts and trying to make Latin and learning Latin more accessible and less stressful and crappy than it often is for people.
A noble goal, because it is often inaccessible and crappy to learn.
Yeah, and there's, the thing is, there's like fun stuff to do with it, and there's fun stuff you can do even when you're pretty new to it, and so why make it boring? I don't know. There's just sort of so much that could be exciting about it, and so anyway, that's what I spend most of my time thinking about and working on.
And I'm pretty sure you heard about SeumasU via Twitter, or at least that's where we first crossed paths. What ticked you over the line to come and do a class with me?
There were a few different ones that I was tempted by. Actually, there were quite a few different ones that I was tempted by, and I think the timing with the LGPSI, when it was like I was enough out of my last year of my old teaching job where I had the time, because in my last year of my old teaching job, I wasn't always necessarily awake at 8 p.m. Eastern, or certainly not necessarily functional, because it was all the pandemic teaching fun of teaching in a secondary school, and lots of Zoom and lots of total exhaustion. But there had been classes that I was really interested in, and I've been wanting to brush up on my Greek, which is really rusty, and I had looked at the old LGPSI files that were online, and I was like, oh, this makes sense, because it sort of, I was familiar with Arberg and that method, and so it just sort of, once that came up as sort of a class as a structured thing, it seemed really appealing as a way I could get some practice without I don't know, it's just really helpful to have like a little external structure for me, where it's like, I'm going to show up once a week and do this. So even if it's after dinner on a Monday night, when I might want to sit back and do some reading in Greek, but my brain is not necessarily primed for the extra effort to read a language that I'm rusty at, it's nice to do it and have it be social and have there be a little structure and a little external accountability, but not so much that it's like a stressful, regimented.
Yes. I mean, I feel the same. Like, even though I know all the things that one ought to do, and I know productive things I could do on my own, I know that I won't necessarily choose to do them. But if I create external structure, if I commit myself to go to someone else's class or have some other kind of meetup, then I know that even if I am totally unprepared, I will still turn up at that hour and do whatever with whoever's there.
Right. And so it's been nice. It's been good practice. And I've since looked back at some biblical Greek, and it's been sort of nice that it's not that my Greek had totally deserted me before, but it's sort of nice that there are certain things that are just back in the realm of really familiar that I don't have to think about or look up, or so my Greek reading is still, it's not zipping along at sort of native speaker pace as I wouldn't expect it to be at this stage.
I definitely wouldn't promise that to you.
Yeah. Well, no, look, but I am not coming out any worse than I came in. So.
So you've mostly done the LGPSI class, which and has been through several we started with kind of the draft version that existed, and then we went along, and then we did some things that were kind of half formed, and lately we've been doing things that were just totally non-existent until we turned up to class and started writing them. What's been good for you? What have you enjoyed about that, and what have you got out of it?
I don't know. What's been kind of fun about it is there's sort of a level of, I think all of those different things have been fun. So like the reading a text, reading some of the older stuff and then having some conversations that are structured around some of the vocabulary and the constructions that are featured in the chapter is really helpful and just good in sort of active practice of the language. So it's not just sort of reading and deciphering. And I think that's also been the case with things like we did a short movie talk a few weeks ago, which I really enjoyed and totally stole from one of my next Latin lessons that I was doing. Not the same film, but a different one. But what I have really enjoyed about the sort of, I don't know, the sort of collaborative writing almost of the stories that we've been doing is there's almost a level that's sort of like, it's been a long since I've done like tabletop role-playing games, but there's a little bit of that, of the sort of enjoyment, the same type of enjoyment of that, where there's sort of like this there's sort of this sense of well, like what could happen here, what could happen, the sense of possibility. But then there's also this sort of constraint of like, okay, well, we don't want to be like totally crazy and out of left field, in the sense that, well, other learners will be using this as a tool, and you don't want to make it sort of incomprehensible and utterly whimsical, but it's actually kind of fun to be creative and a little goofy with it at times, which, I don't know, there's something kind of nicely analogous to the way I feel about learning a language generally, that sort of feels like, is like you're always kind of, I don't know, when you're actively using a language, you're always kind of like operating at the outer edges of your competence. And then so it's kind of exciting and there's sort of rules, but you're not always totally, like, sometimes you're trying stuff that doesn't quite work, but there's sort of a lot of sense of possibility and fun and sort of, I don't know, I like that combination of we know enough to
get into trouble.
We know enough to get into a little trouble, but also like it's sort of productive, like it's productive trouble and it's goofy, and like there's room to sort of there's room to suggest something that's totally outlandish that shouldn't make it into the text, but like but I think that's also just for me, especially with language, but I think this is true of all learning, like the degree to which the social aspect of learning is really I think just sort of like cognitively and sort of neurophysiologically really important. That sense of sort of shared purpose and shared goal, and even if maybe our individual goals about working with Greek aren't the same, mine might not be the same as another student's, but that sense in sort of contributing to a sort of shared creation with language and with what we're doing, and sort of knowing that everyone's bringing maybe different strengths to the table and different areas of weakness, but also everyone's really supportive. And so there's sort of this sense of like, oh, I can't phrase that in Latin or in Greek, but like I do know it in Latin, so we can try that out in Latin. Or someone will ask what something means, and other people might explain in Latin. And there is something really also helpful about, as a person whose first language is, functionally my first language is English, even though technically it isn't, but like functionally my first language is English. And as a person who's a primary English speaker, it's actually really helpful to mostly not revert to English and use a different language and use Latin to try and sort of talk through the Greek stuff.
I found that really fun particularly in our class, because at least in the last iteration, everyone else was a Latin teacher. And I mean, I know that we shouldn't assume that all Greek learners are Latin speakers or Latin students, that's fine. But there is something that's useful in saying, okay, our default option for going to another language is not English. I think because that keeps us still in a part of our brain where we're still operating in a different language that's not English, one that has a lot of parallels, and one that's going to help us kind of come back to the Greek without getting stuck in English. Yeah.
I also grew up in like a very multilingual family where like in the closest sort of rings of the family, most people speak French and Spanish and English with varying degrees of sort of native speakerdom. But you know, we also in the extended family have native speakers of Mandarin and native speakers of Polish, and but sort of and then also, you know, we've had fluent speakers of German and Italian as well. And one of the things that has been valuable to me as a language learner is that often, even if you couldn't shared languages around the table, some of which are related, and so everyone can sort of manage to have a good connected conversation, even if like we're not all speaking the same language or it's not perfect, or no, you know, there's no one language that everyone's 100% comfortable in. And there's something, I don't know, I think about sort of feels like it stretches my brain out a little bit in terms of the goal of things of communication that I find like really enjoyable. So I that's an aspect of it that I've really enjoyed about the class.
Excellent. If someone was thinking about signing up to SeumasU and wasn't quite sure what to expect, what would be your words of encouragement?
It's a lot of fun. I would say, you know, I can only speak for the LGPSI class, but I suspect other classes are probably not.
They're also fun. Let me say they're also fun.
Yeah, I'm sure they're also fun. But what I will say is that one of the things that I think is so nice about the sort of environment and the tone that you've set with it is that it's not there isn't like you know, there isn't like this sort of threat of grades, or there isn't this sort of threat of like being scolded or like meanly corrected or like being talked down to, or you know, I think all of those things are really important to me, both as a learner and as a teacher, in terms of creating a sense of comfort and space to learn. You know, if I was in my super second language acquisition hat on, I would keep talking about lowering the affective filter and all that, which it is, but I also think it sort of nails that combination of pulling you to want to sort of do more and stretch yourself, but out of your own motivation rather than out of a feeling of like threat or shame or inadequacy, which I love. And I think that's probably why one would not come out worse than one went in.
One would have. Well, thanks very much for joining us today, and pleasure to chat with you. Thanks, Hugh.
Yeah, my pleasure.